The purple-scaled dragon hatchling pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the adoption center, her violet eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. At barely 3 months old, Zara was no larger than a house cat, but her reputation had already spread throughout the Galactic adoption network. Aggressive. Unstable. Dangerous. The words followed her like a shadow, whispered by every species that had considered taking her in. Marcus Chin adjusted his worn leather jacket as he stepped through the automatic doors of the Centauri Prime Adoption Center. The human engineer had come here on a whim, really. His apartment felt too quiet these days, and his job designing atmospheric processors for terraforming colonies left him with more money than hobbies. He had been thinking about getting a pet, maybe one of those domesticated elfin ferrets that were popular among the station workers. The Zalkarian receptionist looked up from her datapad, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "Mr. Chen? You have an appointment for companion animal selection?" "That's right." Marcus signed the digital clipboard she handed him. "I was hoping to see what you have available." "Certainly. Follow me to viewing section beta." Her tentacles gestured toward a long corridor lined with transparent aluminum chambers. "We have several excellent options for human companionship. The elfin ferrets are quite popular, as are the Rigelian songbirds." Marcus nodded politely as they walked past chamber after chamber of colorful, exotic creatures. Each one seemed perfectly suited for their intended role as companions. Playful, friendly, domesticated. The tour guide rattled off statistics about feeding requirements, exercise needs, and compatibility ratings. They had nearly reached the end of the corridor when Marcus heard it. A soft, mournful sound that seemed to carry the weight of absolute loneliness. He stopped walking. What was that? The Zalkarian's tentacles writhed nervously. "Oh, that's nothing you need concern yourself with. Just one of our challenging cases." But Marcus was already walking toward the sound. In the farthest corner of the facility, in a chamber noticeably separate from the others, he found her. The small dragon sat with her back to the viewing window, her violet scales dim with sadness. A sign on her chamber read, "Caution, potentially dangerous. Authorized personnel only." "She's beautiful," Marcus said softly. The receptionist's eyes widened. "Mr. Chen, I must advise against any interest in that particular creature. She's been returned 17 times in the past month alone. The dragon species is notoriously difficult to manage, especially the purple-scaled variants. They're too intelligent, too emotional, too unpredictable for most households." Marcus pressed his hand against the glass. At the sound, the little dragon turned around. Her large eyes met his, and, for a moment, Marcus felt like he was looking into the soul of someone who had given up hope entirely. "What happened to her?" he asked. The receptionist consulted her datapad reluctantly. "Zara, designation D4471. Hatched in captivity after her mother was killed by poachers. The Crystalline Collective tried to raise her first, but claimed she was too aggressive when she defended her food. Then, a family of benzite merchants took her, but returned her because she wouldn't stop trying to follow them everywhere. A group of researchers wanted to study her, but she apparently became depressed and stopped eating." The list went on. Each rejection had carved deeper into the little dragon's spirit. The Andorian iceworkers said she was too warm. The Vulcan academic claimed she was too emotional. The Klingon family decided she wasn't fierce enough for their household. And humans? Marcus asked. "Has any human family tried to adopt her?" "No," the receptionist admitted. "Most humans request smaller, more manageable companions. Dragons have a reputation for being complicated." Marcus watched as Zara pressed her small snout against the glass where his hand rested. Her breath fogged the transparent aluminum in little puffs. Despite everything she had been through, there was still a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "I'd like to meet her," Marcus said. "Mr. Chen, I really must insist, just a meeting. In one of your interaction rooms." The receptionist's tentacles curled with anxiety, but she led him to a small chamber designed for potential adopters to spend time with animals. The room was sterile but comfortable, with soft lighting and a few basic toys scattered around. When they brought Zara in, she immediately retreated to the farthest corner, making herself as small as possible. Her scales had darkened to a deep purple, almost black. Marcus sat down on the floor across from her, far enough away to give her space but close enough to speak softly. Hey there, he said gently. I'm Marcus. I heard you've had a rough time lately. Zara's eyes flicked toward him, but she remained motionless. Marcus pulled a protein bar from his pocket and unwrapped it slowly. I know what it's like to feel like you don't fit in anywhere. I grew up on Earth, in a small town where everyone looked the same, thought the same, wanted the same things. I was always the one who was more interested in taking apart old engines than playing sports. He broke off a small piece of the protein bar and placed it on the floor between them. When I finally got off-world, I thought things would be different. And they were, in some ways. But, in others. He shrugged. Well, being different is being different, no matter which planet you're on. Zara's nostrils flared as she caught the scent of the food, but she didn't move toward it. The thing about being an engineer, Marcus continued, is that you learn to see potential where other people see problems. This morning I was working on an atmospheric processor that everyone said was beyond repair. Too many failed systems, too many patches, too many people who had given up on it. He smiled. But I could see what it could become with the right attention. Very slowly, Zara crept forward until she could sniff the piece of protein bar. Her tongue darted out to taste it, and her eyes widened slightly. Apparently, it met with her approval, because she delicately picked it up and ate it. You know what I think? Marcus said, offering another small piece. I think you're not too anything. I think you're exactly what you're supposed to be, and everyone else just hasn't been paying attention. This time, Zara came a little closer to accept the food. Her scales were beginning to lighten back to their natural violet hue. Marcus spent the next hour in that room, just talking. He told Zara about his work, about the planets he had helped terraform, about the satisfaction of fixing something that everyone else had written off as broken. And, slowly, gradually, Zara began to respond. She didn't speak. Dragons her age weren't fully vocal yet, but she listened. When Marcus mentioned his lonely apartment, she tilted her head sympathetically. When he talked about the view from his window overlooking the engineering district, her eyes brightened with curiosity. By the end of the session, Zara had crept close enough to let Marcus gently stroke the scales along her neck. They were surprisingly warm and incredibly soft, like touching liquid starlight. I'd like to take her home, Marcus told the receptionist when the session ended. The Zelkarian's four eyes blinked in rapid succession. Mr. Chen, are you certain? The care requirements for a dragon are extensive. They need specialized food, temperature regulation, mental stimulation. And, as she grows, she'll become quite large. Adult dragons can reach sizes comparable to your Earth elephants. I've read the care guidelines, Marcus lied. He would read them thoroughly tonight. And, I have a large apartment with a good climate control system. There are also the legal considerations. Dragons are highly intelligent. As she matures, she'll essentially be a sentient being living in your home. The psychological bonding process is intense and largely irreversible. Marcus looked back through the window at Zara, who was watching him with an expression that seemed almost hopeful. Sounds like she'll be good company then. The adoption process took 3 hours. Marcus filled out forms, submitted to background checks, and listened to multiple warnings about the challenges of dragon care. Through it all, Zara waited patiently in her transport carrier, occasionally making soft chirping sounds when she heard his voice. Finally, as the station's artificial sun was setting through the massive viewport, Marcus Chen walked out of the adoption center with a small dragon carrier in his hands and 17 warnings about what he was getting himself into. His apartment was in the engineering district, a practical space filled with half-finished projects and technical manuals. As soon as he opened the carrier, Zara emerged cautiously, her violet scales reflecting the warm lighting he had installed to combat the sterile atmosphere of station life. She explored slowly at first, sniffing everything, her claws clicking softly on the metal flooring. Marcus watched as she investigated his workbench, fascinated by the various tools and components scattered across its surface. This is your home now, Marcus said softly. For as long as you want it to be. Zara looked up at him, and, for the first time since he had met her, she made a sound that wasn't mournful. It was a small, questioning chirp, almost like she was asking if he really meant it. I mean it, Marcus confirmed. No one's going to send you back. No one's going to decide you're too much trouble. This is your place now. That night, Marcus set up a sleeping area for Zara near the environmental controls where she could regulate her temperature as needed. He had expected her to be cautious, to hide, to take time adjusting to yet another new environment. Instead, as he settled into his own bed, he heard the soft click of claws on metal flooring. A moment later, a small violet shape appeared at the foot of his bed, looking up at him questioningly.
"Oh," Marcus said, understanding. "You don't want to sleep alone."
Zara chirped softly, and Marcus patted the blanket beside him. She clambered up with surprising grace, curled into a small ball near his feet, and, for the first time in months, fell into a peaceful sleep. Marcus lay awake for a while, watching her breathe, marveling at the trust the small creature had placed in him after everything she had been through. Tomorrow, he would start learning everything there was to know about dragon care. He would redesign his apartment to better accommodate her needs as she grew. He would research dragon psychology and behavior patterns. But tonight, he simply felt grateful that he had wandered down that corridor, that he had heard her lonely cry, that he had looked past the warnings and labels to see what everyone else had missed. Outside his window, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and, on a small space station orbiting a distant world, a rejected dragon slept safely for the first time in her short life, while a human engineer planned the modifications he would need to make to ensure she would always have a home. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus brought Zara home, and his apartment had transformed into something he barely recognized. Where once neat rows of technical manuals had lined his shelves, now small platforms and perches allowed the growing dragon to explore at different heights. His workbench had gained a secondary surface at a lower level where Zara could watch him work, her intelligent eyes following every movement of his tools. The dragon herself had changed dramatically. Her scales had brightened to a brilliant violet that seemed to shimmer with inner light. She had grown noticeably larger, now about the size of a medium dog, and her movements had gained confidence and grace. Most remarkably, she had begun to vocalize more complex sounds, experimenting with different tones and inflections. Marcus discovered that dragons were indeed as intelligent as the warnings had suggested. Zara learned routines quickly, understood basic commands within days, and showed an uncanny ability to sense his moods. When he was frustrated with a difficult project, she would bring him small objects in what appeared to be an attempt to help. When he was tired, she would curl up nearby and hum softly, a sound that seemed to ease the tension from his shoulders. This morning was different, though. Marcus woke to find Zara sitting by the apartment's main viewport, staring out at the stars with an expression of deep longing. She had been doing this more frequently lately, and he suspected he knew why. "Missing the sky, aren't you?" he asked gently, settling beside her with his morning coffee. Zara made a soft, complex sound that Marcus was beginning to recognize as her way of expressing complicated emotions. She leaned against his leg, seeking comfort while continuing to gaze outward. The space station had recreational facilities, including a large observation deck with a transparent dome that offered an unobstructed view of space. Marcus had been meaning to take Zara there, but he had been hesitant. His interactions with the other station residents had been limited and professional. He wasn't sure how they would react to seeing a human with a dragon. His comm unit chimed with an incoming message from his supervisor. "Shen, we need you in conference room 7 in an hour. The atmospheric processor on Kepler 438b is showing some anomalous readings, and the terraforming committee wants your input on whether we should abort the project." Marcus looked at Zara, who was still pressed against the viewport. The meeting could take hours, and she clearly needed something he couldn't provide in their apartment. "Want to go for a walk?" he asked. Zara's head turned toward him immediately, her eyes bright with interest. She had been cooped up in the apartment for weeks, only leaving for brief trips to the veterinary clinic for her health checks. Marcus attached the specially designed harness he had ordered for her. Dragons were not traditionally kept as companions, so he had to have it custom manufactured. Zara submitted to the process patiently, though she clearly found the restraint unnecessary. The corridors of Centauri Prime Station were bustling with activity as the day shift began. Marcus had chosen this route specifically because it would take them through some of the less crowded sections, but, even so, they attracted attention. A group of Andorian technicians stopped their conversation to stare as they passed. Marcus heard one of them mutter something about humans and their strange pets in their native language. He pretended not to understand, though his universal translator picked up every word. Near the central hub, they encountered a family of Betazoid merchants. The parents quickly ushered their children to the opposite side of the corridor, shooting nervous glances at Zara. The dragon noticed their fear and pressed closer to Marcus, her scales darkening slightly with distress. "It's all right," Marcus murmured to her. "They just don't know you like I do." The observation deck was nearly empty when they arrived, which Marcus hoped would give Zara a chance to relax and enjoy the view without unwanted attention. The dome stretched overhead, offering a breathtaking panorama of stars, nebulae, and the distant glow of inhabited worlds.
Zara's reaction was immediate and profound.
She pulled forward eagerly, her neck stretching upward toward the transparent ceiling. When Marcus released the harness, she spread her wings for the first time since he had known her. They were still small, nowhere near large enough for flight, but they caught the light from the stars above and threw patterns of violet and gold across the deck. Marcus found himself holding his breath as he watched her. In that moment, he could see what she would become. The graceful, powerful creature she was meant to be, soaring among the stars instead of hiding in a small apartment.
Magnificent, isn't she? Marcus turned to see an elderly Vulcan woman approaching.
She wore the robes of an academic, and her manner was calm and observational rather than fearful. "She is," Marcus agreed cautiously.
"I am Dr. Tlar, xenobiology researcher.
I have been studying dragon development patterns for several decades." The Vulcan moved slowly, keeping her distance but clearly interested.
"This is Zara, designation D4471, correct?"
Marcus felt a protective instinct flare. "Yes, but she's not a research subject anymore."
"She's my companion." "Peace, young human. I mean no harm to either of you.
I am simply curious about her progress."
Tlar tilted her head, studying Zara's posture and wing position.
The reports from the adoption center indicated significant behavioral challenges. Yet she appears quite well adjusted.
As if understanding that she was being discussed, Zara approached the Vulcan with interest rather than fear.
She stopped just outside arm's reach and tilted her head, mirroring Tlar's gesture.
"Fascinating," Tlar murmured. "She is exhibiting complex social behavior. The defensive posturing mentioned in her psychological profile is entirely absent."
"Maybe the profile was wrong," Marcus suggested.
"Maybe she was never the problem."
Tlar raised an eyebrow in the characteristic Vulcan expression of mild surprise.
"An interesting hypothesis.
Dragons are highly empathic creatures, particularly in their juvenile stage. Their behavior often reflects the emotional environment of their caretakers." Before Marcus could respond, his comm unit chimed urgently. The message was from station security: "All personnel report to designated emergency stations immediately. Unidentified vessel approaching on intercept course." This is not a drill.
The observation deck's lighting shifted to the amber tones of alert status.
Through the dome above, Marcus could see the running lights of security ships moving into defensive positions.
Zara sensed the change in atmosphere immediately.
Her scales darkened and she pressed against Marcus's leg, making a low, worried sound. "We need to get back to the residential section," Marcus said, reaching for Zara's harness. But, as he looked up through the dome, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The approaching ship was massive, easily 10 times the size of anything in the station's defensive fleet. Its hull was dark metal, covered in weapon ports and sensor arrays. This wasn't a merchant vessel or even a standard military ship. This was something designed for one purpose only.
"Slaver ship," Tlar said grimly, following his gaze. "Thackeray class, by the configuration.
They specialize in capture and transport of rare or exotic species." Marcus's mind immediately went to the adoption center, to all the unique creatures housed there. And then, he thought about the reports in Zara's file, about her mother being killed by poachers.
His hands tightened protectively on her harness.
The station's comm system crackled to life. "Attention Centauri Prime Station.
This is Captain Vex of the merchant vessel Bone Collector. We are conducting a legal salvage operation under syndicate maritime law.
Stand down your defenses and prepare for boarding inspection."
"Syndicate law isn't recognized in this sector," Marcus muttered. "Unfortunately," Tlar said, "recognition and enforcement are different matters. The station's security force is primarily designed for internal peacekeeping and minor threats.
They are not equipped for a confrontation with a ship of this class."
Another announcement echoed through the deck: "All residents return to quarters immediately.
Security teams to positions.
This station does not recognize syndicate authority and will not permit unauthorized boarding."
But Marcus could see the futility of the station's resistance through the dome above. The Bone Collector had moved into position directly over the station's primary docking bay, and smaller ships were detaching from its hull like metallic spores. Zara was trembling now, and Marcus realized that she might be picking up on more than just the general tension in the air. Dragons were empathic, but they were also said to have other senses that most species lacked. "She knows something," he said suddenly. "Look at her." Zara was staring upward at the slaver ship, her eyes wide with what looked like recognition and terror. She began to make a sound Marcus had never heard before, a low, mournful call that seemed to carry across the observation deck. "By the stars," Tlar breathed. "She is responding to something specific. Dragons can sense their own kind across vast distances." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. "There are other dragons on that ship. Captured ones, most likely. The Bone Collector is known for trafficking in highly intelligent species. Dragons, particularly young ones, are extremely valuable on the black market." As if summoned by Zara's call, a responding cry echoed faintly through the station's hull. It was picked up by the communications array and transmitted through the emergency channels, a haunting sound that spoke of captivity and despair. Zara's response was immediate and heartbreaking. She threw back her head and let out a cry that was part grief, part rage, and part determination. Her scales shifted through a spectrum of colors Marcus had never seen before, settling on a deep, angry red. "We have to do something," Marcus said. Tlar looked at him with something that might have been respect. "The station's defenses are insufficient. The boarding parties will likely reach the adoption center within the hour. Any unique or valuable specimens will be seized under their interpretation of salvage rights." Marcus felt a cold fury building in his chest. These beings saw creatures like Zara as cargo, as objects to be bought and sold. They had killed her mother, destroyed her family, and now they wanted to take away the friends she had found at the adoption center. "There has to be something we can do," he insisted. Tlar was quiet for a long moment, studying Zara's agitated state. "Perhaps there is. Dragons, even juveniles, possess capabilities that are not fully understood by most species. Their empathic abilities, their intelligence, their capacity for learning and adaptation, these traits were considered liabilities by her previous caregivers." "But they're not liabilities," Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. "They're advantages." "Indeed. In the right circumstances, with the right guidance, a young dragon might be capable of far more than anyone suspects." Through the dome above, they could see the first boarding ships approaching the station's docking bays. Security teams were taking positions, but Marcus could see the doubt in their movements. They knew they were outgunned and outnumbered. Zara looked up at him with eyes that held intelligence far beyond her months of life. In that gaze, Marcus saw determination, loyalty, and something else that made his decision for him. "What do you need me to do?" he asked her softly. Her answer was a sound unlike anything she had made before, complex and musical, conveying meaning that transcended language. And, somehow, impossibly, Marcus understood exactly what she was telling him. The battle for Centauri Prime Station was about to begin, and it would not be fought with conventional weapons or standard tactics. It would be fought with trust, with intelligence, and with the kind of courage that only emerges when someone you love is in danger. Marcus Chen had thought he was adopting a pet. Instead, it seemed he had found a partner. Marcus had never been in a firefight before. His experience with conflict was limited to heated debates over engineering specifications and the occasional argument with stubborn atmospheric processors. But, as he crouched behind an overturned security barrier with Zara pressed against his side, listening to the sound of energy weapons echoing through the station's corridors, he was learning quickly. The Bone Collector's boarding parties had been more professional than the station's security force had anticipated. Within 30 minutes of docking, they had secured the main hub and were systematically moving through each section. Their goal was clear: capture anything of value, neutralize resistance, and strip the station of its most profitable assets. Marcus had wanted to return to his apartment, to barricade themselves in and wait for help that might never come. But Zara had other ideas. The young dragon had led him deeper into the station, through maintenance corridors and emergency passages that she seemed to navigate by instinct. "I think she's following the distress calls," Dr. Tlar said quietly. The Vulcan scientist had insisted on accompanying them, claiming that her research into dragon behavior might prove useful. Marcus suspected she was simply too curious to hide safely in her quarters. The other dragons' cries had grown stronger as they moved through the station. Zara responded to each one, her own vocalizations creating a complex pattern of communication that Marcus was beginning to recognize as a form of echolocation. She was mapping not just the station's layout, but the location and emotional state of every dragon within range. They reached a junction point in the maintenance system where 3 corridors met. Through the metal grating beneath their feet, Marcus could hear voices and footsteps. The slavers were directly below them, moving through the main corridor toward the adoption center. Zara's scales had shifted to a deep blue that Marcus had never seen before. Her eyes were focused with laser-like intensity on something only she could sense. When she looked at him, Marcus felt the strangest sensation, as if thoughts and emotions that weren't his own were touching the edges of his mind. "She's trying to communicate telepathically," Plar whispered. "Dragons develop this capability as they mature, but I've never observed it in one so young." Marcus closed his eyes and tried to quiet his racing thoughts, to open his mind to whatever Zara was trying to share. Images began to form in his consciousness. Not visual exactly, but conceptual impressions that carried meaning. He saw the station from above, its structure laid out like a 3-dimensional blueprint. He sensed the locations of the other dragons, their fear and confusion creating emotional beacons in the dark. And he understood what Zara wanted to do. "The environmental controls," he said suddenly. "She wants me to access the environmental controls." Plar's eyebrows rose. For what purpose? More impressions flooded Marcus's mind. Dragons were creatures of air and fire, sensitive to atmospheric composition and pressure changes. What felt normal to humans and other species could be manipulated in ways that would give dragons significant advantages. "She wants to change the air mixture," Marcus explained. "Increase the oxygen content in certain sections while decreasing it in others. Dragons can process high oxygen environments better than most species. It would make them faster and stronger while making the slavers sluggish and confused." "Ingenious," Plar murmured. "But the environmental controls for this section are located in the central engineering hub. The slavers will have secured that area by now." Marcus was already moving toward the nearest access panel. "Not the manual controls. I can access the automated systems through any maintenance interface." He pulled out a toolkit that had become as natural to carry as his own hands. "The station's atmospheric processors use a distributed network. I can create localized changes without affecting the primary life support systems." As he worked, Zara positioned herself to watch both approaches to their hiding spot. Her hearing was far superior to human or Vulcan, and she could detect movement long before the others. Plar kept track of the slaver teams through the security feeds on her portable scanner. "Team Alpha has reached the adoption center," she reported quietly. "They're beginning their assessment of the creatures housed there." Marcus's jaw tightened as he bypassed security protocols he had helped design. On the screen, he could see the systematic way the slavers were evaluating each animal, scanning them with portable equipment, marking some for capture and dismissing others. "Team Beta is moving toward the residential sections," Plar continued. "They appear to be searching for something specific." "Us," Marcus said grimly. "Dragons this young don't usually survive on their own. They know Zara must have a caretaker somewhere on the station." His fingers flew over the interface, routing control pathways and adjusting atmospheric mixtures with surgical precision. Years of terraforming work had made him intimately familiar with the delicate balance of gases that different species required. Now he was weaponizing that knowledge. In sections where the slavers were operating, he began reducing oxygen content while increasing nitrogen levels. The change was subtle enough to avoid triggering emergency systems, but significant enough to cause fatigue, confusion, and slowed reaction times in most humanoid species. In the areas where dragons were being held, he did the opposite. Higher oxygen, reduced atmospheric pressure, and trace amounts of compounds that would stimulate reptilian nervous systems. Zara's response was immediate. Her scales brightened and her movements became more fluid and confident. Through their growing mental connection, Marcus could sense her satisfaction with the changes. "The dragons in the adoption center are responding," Plar observed, monitoring the security feeds. "Their stress indicators are decreasing while their activity levels are increasing." "Most interesting." On the screen, Marcus could see the captured dragons beginning to move differently. They were still confined, still afraid, but there was something new in their postures. Purpose. Unity. Zara made a complex series of sounds, and Marcus realized she was communicating with the others through the station's ventilation system. Dragons had vocal ranges that extended far beyond human hearing, and the metal ducts were carrying her calls throughout the facility.
"She's coordinating them," he said in amazement. "She's telling them what's happening and what to do."
The response came in a chorus of dragon voices, each one different but all carrying the same message of acknowledgement and readiness. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what he was witnessing.
These weren't just animals responding to stimuli.
They were intelligent beings organizing a resistance. Through the security feeds, they watched as the slavers in the adoption center began to stumble. The reduced oxygen was affecting their coordination and judgment. They leaned against walls, breathing heavily, while their captives became increasingly agile and alert. Team Alpha is requesting medical assistance, Tlar reported, listening to their intercepted communications.
They're reporting sudden onset fatigue and disorientation.
Good, Marcus said, making final adjustments to the atmospheric controls.
How long before they figure out what's happening?
Their equipment is primitive by station standards. They likely lack sophisticated atmospheric monitoring. However, they will eventually adapt or request support from their ship. Marcus was about to respond when Zara suddenly went rigid beside him. Her scales shifted rapidly through a spectrum of colors before settling on deep red.
She let out a low, warning growl.
Multiple contacts approaching, Tlar confirmed, checking her scanner.
Team Beta has found our general location. They're moving through the maintenance corridors.
The sound of metal being cut echoed through the passage behind them. The slavers were using industrial tools to force their way through the access hatches.
Zara looked at Marcus with an expression that conveyed absolute trust and determination.
She made a sound that was unmistakably a request for permission. She wants to engage them directly, Marcus said, understanding flowing through their mental link. Inadvisable, Tlar said immediately.
She is still juvenile.
Her fire-breathing capability is minimal, and her size puts her at a significant disadvantage. But Marcus was seeing something else through Zara's eyes. She wasn't planning to fight the slavers with tooth and claw. She had a much more sophisticated strategy in mind. She doesn't want to fight them, he said slowly.
She wants to lead them somewhere specific. More impressions flooded his mind.
The station's layout, the positions of the other dragon teams, the carefully adjusted atmospheric conditions in different sections. Zara had been thinking several steps ahead, and her plan was far more complex than simple confrontation.
The central hub, Marcus said, understanding dawning.
She wants to draw all the slaver teams to the central hub.
To what end? Tlar asked.
Marcus was already gathering his tools, preparing to move. The hub has the most sophisticated environmental controls on the station. And it's where the security forces have made their last stand. The sound of cutting was getting closer. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the slavers broke through. Zara moved to the passage entrance, her posture alert but not aggressive. She looked back at Marcus one more time, and in her gaze he saw something that made his heart race with a mixture of pride and terror.
She wasn't just a pet anymore. She wasn't even just a companion.
She was a strategist, a leader, a being capable of thinking beyond her own survival to the welfare of others. And she was asking him to trust her completely.
Marcus took a deep breath and nodded. Lead the way. Zara's response was a sound of pure determination.
She spread her wings slightly, took position at the passage junction, and began to call out in frequencies that Marcus could feel more than hear. Throughout the station, her voice carried a message that every dragon understood: the real battle was about to begin.
Behind them, the cutting tools finally broke through the access hatch.
Voices echoed in the narrow corridor, harsh and professional. The slavers had found their trail. Marcus Chen, who had never fired a weapon in anger or faced an enemy more dangerous than a malfunctioning atmospheric processor, followed a juvenile dragon into the most important fight of his life. And, for the first time since the crisis began, he felt genuinely optimistic about their chances. After all, he was no longer fighting alone. The central hub of Centauri Prime Station had become a war zone. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across overturned furniture and hastily constructed barricades. Station security forces had made their final stand here, using every piece of cover they could find while energy weapons fire lit up the vast circular chamber. Marcus followed Zara through the upper maintenance catwalks, marveling at her ability to move silently despite her increasing size. Below them, he could see the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. The station's defenders were brave but overwhelmed, while the slavers advanced with professional precision and superior equipment. Captain Reese, the station's security chief, was coordinating the defense from behind a reinforced security desk. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the strain in her movements. The reduced oxygen levels he had implemented were affecting everyone, but the security forces lacked the enhanced respiratory systems that would help them adapt. The atmospheric modifications are hampering our own people as much as the enemy, Plar observed quietly. Marcus was already adjusting his portable interface. I can create localized improvements around the security positions. It'll take a few minutes to route the airflow properly. But Zara had other priorities. She was focused intently on the far side of the hub, where a group of slavers had set up a temporary command post. Through their mental connection, Marcus could sense her recognition of something important. The leader of the slaver team was a scarred Orion male whose bioscanner was displaying detailed information about captured specimens. But what caught Zara's attention wasn't the equipment, it was the small transport cage sitting beside the command post. Inside the cage was another dragon. This one was smaller than Zara, with scales that had faded to a dull gray from stress and captivity. Marcus felt Zara's emotional response like a physical blow, recognition, grief, and a protective fury that made her scales shimmer with dangerous energy. Family, Marcus said softly, understanding. That's her clutchmate. Dragons form intense bonds with their siblings, Plar confirmed. The psychological trauma of separation can be devastating for juveniles. The caged dragon was barely moving, its head hanging low in a posture of complete defeat. Through Zara's enhanced senses, Marcus could feel the other creature's despair like a weight pressing against his consciousness. Zara's response was immediate and decisive. She began to move along the catwalks toward a position directly above the slaver command post, her movements now urgent rather than cautious. She's going to do something reckless, Marcus said, recognizing the signs. Indeed. The protective instincts of dragons toward their family members can override all other considerations, including self-preservation. Marcus increased his pace, trying to keep up with Zara while working on his portable interface. He needed to finish the atmospheric adjustments before she did whatever she was planning. Below them, the firefight was intensifying as more slaver teams converged on the hub. The station's defensive position was becoming untenable. Captain Reese was shouting orders, trying to coordinate a fighting retreat, but the slavers had superior numbers and position. It was only a matter of time before the defense collapsed entirely. That was when Zara reached her chosen position. Marcus watched in amazement as the young dragon began to do something he had only read about in xenobiology texts. Her scales shifted through a complex pattern of colors, deep blues, brilliant purples, flashes of gold and silver. It was hypnotically beautiful, but more than that, it was functional. Chromatic communication, Plar breathed. She's broadcasting on multiple spectrums simultaneously. The pattern of colors wasn't random. It was a language, and every dragon on the station was receiving the message. Through the security feeds on Plar's scanner, Marcus could see the captured dragons in the adoption center responding. Their own scales began to shift and change, creating a visual echo of Zara's communication. But, more than that, dragons throughout the station were responding, including dragons that Marcus hadn't known were there. How many dragons are actually on this station, he asked. More than official records indicate, Plar replied, studying her readings. It appears there are several unregistered individuals living in various sections. Some may be former adoptees who chose to remain on station rather than relocate. The chromatic communication was spreading like a visual chain reaction. Dragons in hiding, dragons in custody, dragons who had been trying to live quietly without drawing attention, all of them were now part of Zara's network. And they were all converging on the central hub. Marcus completed his atmospheric adjustments just as the first of the responding dragons arrived. They came through ventilation shafts, emergency passages, and maintenance corridors that most species couldn't navigate. Some were juveniles like Zara, others were adolescents approaching full size. The slavers noticed them immediately. Shouts went up from their command post as bioscanners detected multiple high-value targets approaching from all directions. "Sir, we're reading at least 15 dragons converging on this position," one of the technicians reported. Estimated value, significant. The Orion commander's scarred face split into a predatory grin. Adjust priorities.
Forget the security forces, focus on capturing the dragons. This just became the most profitable raid in sector history. But the dragons weren't approaching as individual targets. They were moving with coordination and purpose, following Zara's strategic guidance through their chromatic communication network. The first group emerged from the lower ventilation systems, their scales flashing in patterns that Marcus was beginning to recognize as tactical signals. They didn't attack immediately, instead, they took positions that would give them advantages when the conflict began. They're flanking, Marcus realized. Zara's teaching them military tactics. Impossible, Tlar said. Dragons don't possess inherent knowledge of organized warfare.
No, but they're incredibly intelligent and adaptive.
And I've been talking to her about my work, including the defensive strategies we use for protecting terraforming equipment from hostile local fauna. Below them, Captain Reese had noticed the dragon arrivals with a mixture of hope and confusion. The station's defenders were trained to protect the creatures in their care, but they had never expected those same creatures to participate in their own defense. Zara's scale shifted to brilliant red, and Marcus felt the emotional charge of her signal through their mental link. It was time to begin. What happened next would be talked about in xenobiology circles for decades.
The dragons attacked with a coordination that demonstrated intelligence, planning, and tactical awareness that shocked everyone present.
They didn't rely on brute force or natural weapons.
Instead, they used the modified atmospheric conditions to their advantage, moving with enhanced speed and agility while their opponents struggled with reduced oxygen and increased nitrogen narcosis. The younger dragons focused on disruption, overturning equipment, disabling weapons, and creating chaos in the slavers' organized formations. The older ones used more sophisticated tactics, working together to isolate individual opponents and neutralize them without causing permanent harm. Marcus watched in awe as a group of adolescent dragons executed a perfectly coordinated pincer movement, herding a squad of slavers into a section where he had reduced the oxygen content to barely breathable levels.
The slavers stumbled and fell, overcome by hypoxia, while the dragons remained alert and active.
Remarkable, Tlar observed. They're demonstrating problem-solving abilities and social cooperation that exceed the highest estimates in current literature. But the most impressive display came from Zara herself. While the other dragons engaged the slaver teams throughout the hub, she focused on the command post and her captured clutchmate. She didn't attack directly. Instead, she used her chromatic communication to coordinate a precision strike that disabled the transport cage's locking mechanism while simultaneously overwhelming the guards with a coordinated assault from 3 different directions. The moment her sibling was free, both young dragons rose into the air, their wings catching the emergency lighting in brilliant displays of violet and gold. They weren't large enough for true flight, but they could glide and hover, giving them a 3-dimensional advantage over their ground-bound opponents. Captain Reese's security forces, recognizing an opportunity when they saw one, launched their own counterattack. With the slavers disoriented by the dragon assault and hampered by the atmospheric modifications, the tide of battle began to shift dramatically. Marcus felt a surge of pride and amazement as he watched Zara coordinate the final phase of the engagement. Through their mental link, he could sense her processing multiple streams of information, the positions of all the dragons, the status of the station's defenders, the tactical situation with each group of slavers. She was thinking and planning several moves ahead, demonstrating strategic capabilities that many seasoned military commanders would envy. The Orion commander, realizing that his carefully planned raid was collapsing into chaos, activated his personal communicator. Bone Collector, this is Commander Vex. Abort capture mission. Repeat, abort capture mission. We need immediate extraction. But the dragons weren't finished with them yet. As the slaver teams tried to retreat toward their docking ports, they found their escape routes blocked by dragons who had anticipated their withdrawal patterns. Every corridor, every passage, every emergency exit had been covered by the coordinated defense network. Marcus's portable interface chimed with a priority message from the station's central computer. Long-range sensors were detecting incoming ships, Federation patrol vessels responding to the station's distress call. Help's coming, he called down to Captain Reese. They may not need to rush, she replied, surveying the hub where Orion slavers sat under guard while dragons perched on nearby surfaces, their scales shimmering with satisfaction. Zara landed on the catwalk beside Marcus, her sibling close behind. Both young dragons were unharmed but exhausted, their scales gradually returning to normal coloration as the adrenaline of combat faded. Through their mental connection, Marcus felt Zara's complex emotional state: relief, triumph, gratitude, and something deeper. A sense of having found her true purpose, of having discovered what she was really capable of when given the chance to protect those she cared about. "You were incredible," he said softly, stroking the scales along her neck. "All of you were." Zara's response was a gentle purr of contentment, but Marcus could sense the larger implications of what had just happened. The galaxy had just learned that dragons were far more than exotic pets or dangerous predators. They were strategic thinkers, natural leaders, and capable of forming complex social networks that could accomplish remarkable things. And it had all started with one rejected hatchling who just needed someone to see her potential. 6 months after the Battle of Centauri Prime Station, as historians were already calling it, Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Dragon Research Institute and marveled at how much his life had changed. The deck had been specifically designed to accommodate dragons of various ages and sizes, with reinforced perches, climate control systems that could handle their temperature preferences, and, most importantly, no barriers or cages. The transparent aluminum dome stretched overhead, offering an unobstructed view of the stars that had once seemed so impossibly distant to the creatures below. Zara had grown significantly in the months since the battle. She was now the size of a large horse, her violet scales having deepened to a rich amethyst that caught the light from a dozen different angles. Her wings, while still not quite large enough for interstellar flight, could carry her around the station with grace and power that drew admiring glances from every species. But, more than her physical growth, it was her intellectual development that amazed everyone who met her. The shy, rejected hatchling had blossomed into a natural leader, not just among dragons but in the broader galactic community. "The Federation Council has approved the Dragon Accords unanimously," Dr. Tlar announced, entering the observation deck with a datapad full of official communications. "Dragons are now officially recognized as a sentient species with full rights and protections under galactic law." Marcus looked up from the atmospheric processor design he was reviewing. His work had shifted significantly since the events on Centauri Prime. Instead of terraforming hostile worlds, he now specialized in creating environments that could accommodate multiple sentient species, including dragons. The demand for his expertise had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. "What about the bone collector?" he asked. "Commander Vax and his crew have been sentenced to life imprisonment for trafficking in sentient beings. The ship itself has been converted into a rehabilitation center for rescued dragons." Tlar's expression carried a note of satisfaction. "Justice, as humans say, has been served." Zara approached from her favorite perch near the dome's apex, landing with barely a sound despite her size. Her clutchmate, who had taken the name Nova after his rescue, followed close behind. The two had never been separated since the battle, and their bond had only grown stronger. Through their mental connection, which had deepened and become more sophisticated over the months, Marcus sensed Zara's complex emotional response to the news. Relief, satisfaction, and something deeper, a sense of validation that her species was finally being seen for what they truly were. "There's more," Tlar continued. "The Galactic Adoption Network has completely restructured their policies for dragon placement. No more mass rejections, no more treating them as difficult pets. They're now partnered with the Institute to ensure proper matches between dragons and families." Marcus smiled, thinking of all the dragons who would benefit from what Zara had started. The Institute had become a model for how different species could work together, with humans providing technical expertise, Vulcans contributing scientific research, and dragons offering insights into their own needs and capabilities. "The first class of dragon ambassadors graduated yesterday," Tlar added. "They'll be working with various governments and organizations throughout the sector to establish dragon populations on suitable worlds." It was an ambitious program, but one that had been sparked by the remarkable events on Centauri Prime. The battle had demonstrated that dragons possessed not just intelligence, but the kind of strategic thinking and social coordination that made them natural leaders and diplomats. Zara made a complex series of sounds, and Marcus felt her thoughts flowing through their connection. Images and concepts that would take paragraphs to explain in standard language were communicated in seconds through their unique bond. "She says the first dragon settlement is ready on Kepler 442b, Marcus translated for Tlar's benefit. "The atmospheric modifications are complete, and the terraforming team has established the basic infrastructure." "Remarkable," Tlar observed. "Their ability to sense environmental conditions from vast distances continues to exceed our understanding."
How she can assess the habitability of a planet 50 light-years away through subtle atmospheric readings is beyond current scientific explanation. Marcus had stopped trying to understand all of Zara's capabilities. Over the months, she had demonstrated abilities that seemed to defy conventional explanation, sensing emotions across species barriers, predicting weather patterns with uncanny accuracy, and, most remarkably, teaching other dragons complex concepts through their chromatic communication system. The observation deck's main entrance slid open, and Captain Reese entered with a group of visitors. Marcus recognized them as representatives from various worlds that were considering dragon settlement programs. "This is the primary research facility," Captain Reese was explaining. "Dragons and humans work together here on everything from atmospheric engineering to xenobiology research." The visitors, a mix of species including Andorians, Betazoids, and even a few Vulcans, looked around with expressions of wonder and cautious interest. Marcus could see them trying to reconcile their preconceptions about dragons with the reality of seeing them engaged in complex intellectual activities. Zara approached the group with confidence, her posture dignified and welcoming. She had learned to modulate her size and presence to avoid intimidating newcomers, but her intelligence was immediately apparent to anyone who met her gaze. "This is Zara," Captain Reese said proudly. "She's one of the Institute's founding members and the primary liaison for dragon-human cooperative projects." One of the Andorian representatives stepped forward hesitantly. "We've heard remarkable stories about dragon capabilities, but seeing them in person is quite different from the reports." Zara's scales shifted to a warm golden hue, a color Marcus had learned indicated friendly amusement. She made a series of soft sounds while her chromatic display created patterns of welcome in what had become a recognized form of interspecies communication. "She says she's pleased to meet you," Marcus translated, "and she hopes your worlds will find the partnership as rewarding as we have." The Betazoid representative, whose empathic abilities allowed her to sense Zara's emotional state directly, looked stunned. The complexity of her thought patterns, it's extraordinary. She's thinking on multiple levels simultaneously, analyzing our emotional states, considering the political implications of our potential partnership, and planning conversation strategies. "Dragons are natural diplomats," Dr. Tlar explained. "Their empathic abilities allow them to understand and respond to the needs of other species in ways that often surprise us." Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched Zara interact with the visitors. Each conversation, each successful demonstration of dragon intelligence and capability, helped to change perceptions that had persisted for centuries. But perhaps the most significant change had been in Marcus himself. The shy engineer who had wandered into an adoption center looking for a simple companion had become one of the galaxy's leading experts on human-dragon cooperation. His apartment had evolved into the Institute's main research facility, and his relationship with Zara had become a model for interspecies partnership. As the day wore on and the visitors departed with detailed information about dragon settlement programs, Marcus found himself alone with Zara and Nova on the observation deck. The station's artificial sunset was painting the dome in shades of gold and crimson, creating a peaceful atmosphere that invited reflection. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked Zara softly. "Choosing to stay here with me instead of joining one of the dragon colonies?" Zara's response came through their mental connection with the warmth and certainty that had become so familiar. Images of their first meeting at the adoption center, of their quiet evenings working together, of the trust and partnership that had grown between them. And then, more complex concepts, the satisfaction of helping other dragons find good homes, the joy of contributing to something larger than herself, the deep sense of belonging that came from being truly understood and valued. "This is your home," Marcus said, understanding. "Not because you couldn't find anywhere else to go, but because this is where you choose to be." Her affirmation was immediate and certain. But there was more gratitude for the human who had looked past the warnings and labels to see her potential, who had trusted her instincts even when they led into danger, who had given her the chance to become everything she was capable of being. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky above the dome, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them both to this point. It had started with a simple act of kindness, adopting a rejected animal that no one else wanted. But it had become something far more profound, a partnership that had changed laws, challenged assumptions, and opened new possibilities for cooperation between species. Nova curled up nearby, his scales reflecting the starlight in patterns of silver and blue. The younger dragon had found his own purpose at the Institute, working with the rehabilitation programs that helped rescued dragons recover from trauma and find new families.
More dragons were arriving every week, some refugees from illegal trafficking operations, others young adults ready to explore the galaxy and establish new communities. Each one brought their own gifts, their own perspectives, their own potential for contributing to the growing network of dragon-human cooperation. But, for Marcus, the most rewarding moments were still the quiet ones like this, when he could simply appreciate the remarkable creature who had chosen to share her life with him. Zara had never been a pet, he realized now. She had been a partner from the very beginning, waiting for someone wise enough to recognize what she had to offer. The observation deck's communication system chimed with an incoming message from the edge of the system. A new ship was approaching, another transport full of dragons seeking refuge, families, and opportunities to contribute to galactic society. Zara lifted her head toward the stars, her scales shimmering with anticipation. Through their connection, Marcus felt her eagerness to welcome the newcomers, to help them find their places in a galaxy that was finally ready to see dragons as more than just exotic curiosities. Ready to get back to work? Marcus asked, gathering his data pads and technical equipment. Zara's response was a sound of pure enthusiasm. Together, they headed toward the docking bay where another group of dragons would soon learn what Zara had discovered months ago, that sometimes, the most powerful force in the universe is simply having someone believe in your potential. As they walked through the corridors of the Institute, passing research labs where humans and dragons worked side by side, Marcus marveled at how a simple decision to adopt an unwanted animal had led to such profound changes. The galaxy was a different place now, one where intelligence and potential mattered more than preconceptions and fear. And, at the heart of it all was a young dragon who had once murmured that no one wanted her, but who had found her true family among the stars.